Good afternoon, everyone. This is Wade Fox, and this is our session of Second Opinion. I want to welcome you to another meeting that we're going to have with a very exciting candidate running in this state for a great district. It's Mr. Rick Green, and we're going to be talking about some major things that he's got accomplished as the next congressman from the state of Massachusetts. Rick, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Great.
Why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about the district that you're going to represent?
Well, it includes Westford. Clearly, that's why we're here today. It really is the New Hampshire border district. It runs across the New Hampshire border in the east from Haverhill all the way to Winchton and Gardner in the west. And then it's really like a saddle on the top of Massachusetts. So you get the border, and then 495 is the kind of the eastern border. It runs down through Lawrence, Lowell, Chelmsford, Westford, all the way down through kind of Acton, Concord, Hudson, Marlborough. And then Route 2 runs, kind of straight through the middle from Concord out to Gardner. That's what it looks like. The reason I'm running is I'm a businessman. My brother and I started a business 20 years ago in Pepperell. Most folks know Pepperell as a small town on the New Hampshire border, which it is. But what they may not know is it was a mill town, and the paper mill was the largest employer for most of the last century. But in the early 2000s, when the mill fell in hard times, a lot of folks lost their job. Downtown was hit hard. Within just a few short years, the little company my brother and I started, 1A Auto, became the largest employer in town. Today, we've created over 500 jobs. We have locations in Westford and Littleton as well as Pepperell. And when I tell people I know what it takes to get the economic engine of the 3rd District revving, it's because I've done it.
Well, good. Now, let's, because people have to understand that this is not like our local campaigns. This is a U.S. Congressman position, right?
That's correct.
Okay. This is the one that Nikki Tsongas has pulled out of.
Yeah, Nikki's retired.
She's retired. So, it's going to be a big challenge. So tell us a little bit about your background, how you kind of came to this conclusion that you needed to run.
Well, honestly, it wasn't even myself, it was my wife. I had actually looked at running against Senator Warren year and a half, 2 years ago, and just felt it was too big. So we have a young family. My wife and I have been married for 10 years. Our children are 8, 6, and 4, Finley, Tessa, and Gifford, and just felt like it was too big. But living in Pepperell, we can get to pretty much any part of this district, or I can, within 45 minutes. And I was actually out on the boat one day. We're up at my parents' summer home in Maine, and I came in, and Maggie was sitting on the end of the dock with my phone, which was extremely odd. And I got off the boat. I said, was anything wrong? What's going on? And she's like, your phone is ringing off the hook. And I thought, well, what could this be? And she's like, Nikki Tsongas retired. I was like, oh, wow, well, we'll have to talk about that. She's like, who are you kidding? You're definitely running. And, when she says that, there's not much else to say.
Okay, good. One of the things that, as looking at your background, if you could, you've been instrumental, besides starting business, in the Mass Fiscal Alliance, if I got that correctly?
That's correct. That's the state's top fiscal watchdog. Yeah. And I started that. Actually, I was the founder and chairman in 2011, 2012. But if I go back a little bit before that, I really kind of got interested in politics in 2010 with Scott Brown's race. And that was the first time. So I'd been running my company 24/7 with my brother, and from early 2000 up to 2010, and that was the first time we started having management in place, and I had some free time. So I got really involved with that race. And I just remember I was actually at the routes 110 and 119 in Littleton when Scott came out on his bus tour with a few days before the election, and you had a sense he could really win it. And there were so many people there. They had to bring it from inside to outside, and then there was banks of snow because it had snowed, and he's up on the bank of snow with a bullhorn, and traffic was stopped in all directions because the roads were no one had thought to have the police come. And it was just this surreal kind of experience. And I kind of hung back, and I just saw these huge crowds and people standing in puddles. I thought to myself, I'm going to figure out who these folks are who come out and vote for these kind of fiscal priorities if Scott wins this thing. And I'm going to find out who they are and how we get them to come out again and again. And that was really the impetus for my entry into politics, I guess.
Well, good. I've been looking at your very aggressive agenda to get things done. I'm going to kind of go through them, but the first one is about, I think you touched on it, about creating jobs. And I'd like for you to address that, given the fact that outside of the state of Massachusetts, I mean, it may be different, but help educate the viewers. You know, we hear really good economic news out of our president, President Trump, and yet everybody I talk to talks about creating more jobs. So help me connect the dots on this
Well,
one.
absolutely. It's more jobs. It's also better jobs. You can always make better jobs. You can always create higher paying jobs. Just yesterday, actually, we opened up, formally had a ribbon cutting on our new R&D center in Pepperell, Massachusetts. So we had outgrown our building in Pepperell when we moved to Westford and Littleton, and we moved back this summer, but yesterday was the official opening. And those are high-paying research development jobs. And so, you know, the way to create economic development is to constantly create more higher-paying jobs so folks can move up the ladder. And you know, that's what I've done at my company, and that's what I'll do when I get down to Congress, because I understand what it takes to do that, what you need and how you create the freedom so the free enterprise system can do its job.
Okay, so it's not just a question of quantity of jobs; it's the quality of the job that matters. I mean,
Absolutely.
Okay, and in doing so, because part of this kind of goes into your next one, which was, and this one I'm very interested in, is improving the infrastructure. Now, I have a question about that, mainly because we do a lot of talking to the local candidates, the state candidates,
Sure.
so forth about that, and they're very specific on certain things. So what would you do for the state of Massachusetts in infrastructure once you're in the Congress?
Well, I can be very specific as well. The Rourke Bridge in Lowell, crosses the Merrimack, was built, I think, in 1983. So 35 years, it's a temporary bridge. It was built as a temporary bridge. And for 35 years, people at all levels of government have been saying, we're going to put, you know, a permanent structure there, and no one's got it done. Well, you may have seen me dive into the Merrimack River. I've kind of become known for that, and I actually swam across. We made that commercial. What's interesting is I was supposed to get out on the other side, but the traffic was so bad they couldn't actually get the TV camera over there. So I had to swim across, and I had to swim back. But it's those kind of things. And then the other thing is Route 2. You know, you look at Route 2, the Concord Rotary. Most folks have had to deal with that at one time or another. If you just look at the map of Massachusetts, all of our major spurs coming out of Boston, radiating out, are all 6-lane, limited access, modern highways, except for Route 2. It still has rotaries and traffic lights and things like that. Along that, you know, the western part of the district, we need to tie Gardner and Fitchburg into the rest of the district so those folks have access to some of the, you know, higher paying jobs, as well as companies can start out there and get access for their goods, you know, access to markets. And then you have Fort Devens, which really, there's so much more we could do there in terms of commercial development, that the fort has been closed down for so long. But Route 2 is the main thoroughfare. So, you know, that project pays for itself by increasing the tax base.
Okay. Well, Rick, we're going to talk about balance and so forth in a little bit later part of the segment, but you bring up a question, and I'm going to have to ask you this, because, and you'll have to project here, but you would think that having such a solid Democratic state that we've got, where we've got both our senators Democrats, all of our representatives are all Democrats, you would think that getting those things fixed would be a slam dunk. I mean, what is it that's inhibiting that, do you think?
Look, you know, I don't want to speak for other folks and what their priorities are, but I think if you look in general at what's going on down in D.C., it's a circus down there. And to be clear, I'm not running to join the circus. All right? I'm running to prove to the people of this district that I'm the best person to serve their interests and the interests of the communities that they love. If I could just real quick go back to infrastructure, you know, folks, a lot of times you don't notice infrastructure until it becomes a big problem. You know, so if the maintenance isn't being kept up and you're not putting the effort into it you should, you may not notice it until something big happens. And you see what happened in Lawrence, Andover, and North Andover, okay, with the gas explosions. It's horrible. It's terrible. But it's a failure of infrastructure. And I think what's really important is folks need to understand, you know, what will I do about a situation like that? I used to be in aerospace. I built rockets, Pegasus and Taurus rockets. So I'm familiar with pressurized systems, the reaction control systems on the vehicles I built. What really concerns me is you have something like 8,600 homes that have been subjected to a pressure that's beyond their design pressure. So if you just think about a balloon when you blow it up. Okay, if you blow it up too much and it pops, you know, that's the explosions. Again, horrible. But if you blow it up just to where it's almost going to pop, but it doesn't, and it comes back, it's never quite the same. So that's what you have at all these homes where they've been exposed to this pressure. They're going to test it, and a lot of them may test out fine, and they can start running the gas through it. But that the pressure regulator at the home may have had a 20 or 30 year lifespan, but now it may only last 2 or 3 years because it was exposed to such a large pressure. And what's going to happen is, what I'm really concerned about is, over the next 2, 3, 4 years, are we going to have more gas leaks? Heaven forbid, more fires or explosions. I think it's critical that we have someone down there in D.C. Who gets this. There's not a bureaucrat in D.C. who's going to be able to pass a maintenance plan by me that doesn't actually keep our friends and neighbors safe.
Well, do you, I'm going to kind of diverge a little bit. Do you think that maybe it's because we've got too many, let's not too many, let's say too few people that are actually coming out of business and, shall we say, real life experiences that are becoming, representatives and so forth down there? I mean,
Yeah.
I hate to say this, but you talk about some of the laws that are written down there, and they say, well, of course it's like that. They're all lawyers,
Yeah.
or they've all been politicians their whole life. So they write it that way. They're in their little bubble, and they don't really have a lot of people like you that come from the outside world that says, here's the real practical experience. Is that kind of what you're bringing?
I mean, absolutely, that's what I'm bringing. But I think the thing, these folks are going to be my colleagues. All right? It's not at all helpful for me to try and ascribe blame and try and figure out, everybody can form a committee. That's what they do. They love forming committees down there to study things. I'm going down there to get stuff done. I'm going down there to fix our roads and bridges, address the opioid crisis, something we haven't talked about, and make sure we're addressing the gas pipelines and things like that. But again, so the labels, trying to figure out blame, it's all water under the bridge. What we need to do is all get together and figure out how we're going to move forward, how we're going to make things better for the people.
Okay. Well, since you brought it up, that was one of the other pillars of your campaign, and I'm going to call it lifestyle crisis or lifestyle dysfunction or something like that. But we've got an opioid crisis that everybody talks about, and I think that I need to hear you tell me how you think people 200 years in the future are going to look back upon this and say, well, on the one hand they had opioid crisis going on, and they said we got to fix that, but at the same time they're legalizing other drugs that had been basically illegal for years. So you've got this paradox, and how do you see that happening to be a factor in how we judge our lifestyles? Sure.
Well, we'll start with the crisis. So you hear everyone talking about the fact that it is a crisis, and it is. But then you look at, okay, so as a businessman, I think to myself, it's a crisis, it's a big problem. So people are already doing something. Before I do anything, I need to figure out what are other folks doing, because I don't want to recreate the wheel. So I looked at the entire Massachusetts delegation. Not one of them has a member of their staff whose job is dealing with the opiate crisis. We already introduced a gentleman who's already running my interim opiate recovery task force, Empowering Recovery. His name is Sal DeFranco, Navy SEAL. This guy gets things done. Sal has a terrific story in business, his personal life, but unfortunately he lost his sister to the opioid epidemic. So he also has a personal passion and commitment to this issue. And as a businessman, if I want to solve an issue, I need to make someone responsible and then hold them accountable. Ultimately, it all falls on my shoulders as congressman. But folks need to know I'm going to have a senior level staff person who's going to be working on this every day, making sure all the resources that are available in D.C. are made available here in our district and to the state, making sure we're coordinating between federal, local, and state law enforcement. The other thing that no one's talking about, so everyone talks about treatment and education, extremely important, and we need to do more. A lot's being done here in Massachusetts, especially at the state and local level. But what folks don't talk about is the supply, and how do you disrupt the supply? The fact is, I built a business on supplying auto parts. I'm competing against companies like Amazon.com, which are revolutionizing our distribution in this country. And I'm uniquely qualified to bring that experience to bear to disrupt what is essentially an illegal business in the narcotics trade.
Well, we're kind of roll into that, but if I'm not mistaken, wasn't there a very large legal action bust, I would call it, in the city of Lowell or Lawrence? I'm not sure which one it was.
It was across numerous communities.
And basically they talked about this part of part of the world being a nexus for distribution, which a lot of people found shocking, because I believe one of the politicians up in New Hampshire has said that the opioid crisis up there was a direct responsibility of the distribution center in Massachusetts, and they all laughed at him. But yeah, apparently the law enforcement guys have now said, yes, maybe that's probably right.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's not, for me, it's not helpful in trying to figure out, he said, she said. The reality is Lawrence is the center of distribution for opiates in New England. It just makes sense. Again, as a distribution professional, just look at a map. Lawrence is right there in the middle. Then you've got 495, 93, 95. So you've got major thoroughfares on which to distribute your product. And then you look at the city of Lawrence itself. We're here in Westford. You couldn't run the opiate trade or any illegal trade out of Westford because everyone would look around and say, oh, why are there 400 cars a day coming into that house? But in a place like Lawrence where you could spread it out, you could have multiple homes a few blocks away, you kind of spread that traffic out. But ultimately, I know that the police on the ground, they know what's going on. The problem is they're not necessarily coordinating with the state folks and the federal folks. The federal folks may know there's a big shipment coming in from overseas, but the local folks don't know that. Or the local folks and the state folks may be cracking down, and when that happens, all of a sudden the traffic and the traffickers move across the border, say to Haverhill or Methuen, but no one's coordinating with those police departments, and so, there's just kind of this jumble of different people all trying to do good things. Once we have someone, and that'll be Sal's job, to coordinate all these efforts. And then again, the other thing you had in this recent bust, these federal agents are risking their life, but according to the Lowell Sun's reporting, there was no cooperation with local authorities. Okay, that's just crazy. All right, first of all, you're putting the feds in jeopardy, you're putting local police in jeopardy, and you're putting local citizens in jeopardy. We need those folks to work together. And part of this is due to the sanctuary city policies that some of these towns and cities have. We can't have that. The first thing I do when I go down there is I take an oath to uphold the Constitution and federal law. How can I support a policy which directly contradicts that oath?
Well, that's a good question, because I was going to ask you, you have some concerns about sanctuary cities. And I think the first question, I'd like to ask you that, because it would seem that a sanctuary city declaration by that city that is against the federal laws seems to think they can trump federal laws. How do they get away with that?
And again, for me, it's not how do they get away with it, it's how do we put an end to it. We need more legal immigration. Okay, we got my brother-in-law is a naturalized citizen. He came here. As a matter of fact, he came to work for my company. He didn't know anybody in the local area, so I invited him to Thanksgiving dinner. That's how he met my sister. I have 4 beautiful nieces and nephews, thanks to my, inviting him to Thanksgiving dinner. But again, the bigger issue is rule of law. And how do we obey our laws? The first thing we have to do is agree we're going to obey all the existing laws. We could pass any number of laws. What does it matter if you have communities who aren't going to obey them? And so that's step number one. I'm the only candidate in this race who has come out strongly against sanctuary cities.
And that's based upon your experience, or that you've seen the effect of having sanctuary cities?
It's based on we're a country of laws. Mm-hmm. We're not a country of lawlessness.
Okay.
Period.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because this keeps rolling on to us. Some of the things we've seen lately on TV would seem to think that there are politicians in this country that are promoting, shall we say, very aggressive disagreement, which I think in my parents' days would have said that's absolutely lawlessness, what they're doing. What do you see as the problem with the current political situation where the people are so at each other's throats about this?
We can all agree. What's going on in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, it's a circus. I'm not running to join the circus. I'm running to fix roads and bridges, address the opioid crisis, create more and better jobs. And I think that's really the problem, is the folks down in D.C. have gotten away from what the job is really all about. It's about serving the people. When I go around and I talk to folks all around the district, nobody asks me the questions about the circus and what's going on in the latest thing that the pundits are talking about. But it's all that the media seems to care about or ask about. Look, I have to stand up to that, and I have to tell those folks, listen, this is not what it's about. People need to see how the government works in their daily life. The number one thing I see, the number one issue that kind of underlies all of this, is people don't get how the federal government impacts their daily lives anymore. They just don't see it. But when you talk about roads and bridges, and you talk about the opioid crisis, everybody knows someone who's impacted by the opioid crisis, or on their own drive to work each day, they can see what's happening to our crumbling infrastructure, and it brings it back home for people.
Okay. We're going into this election. They call it a midterm election, which a lot of people, it all depends on which party you're in and what you're trying to do. It's either you want a lot of people to come out or you don't want a lot of people to come out. This is going
I
to
want
be
a lot of people to come out and vote, go green in 18.
I'm just thinking that this is going to be a very unusual mid-year election. And given that we're in the state of Massachusetts, which I always call one of the bluest of blues, a lot of the successful candidates end up pulling people out of the Democratic Party, or they pull them out of the Republican Party, depending on which side they're on. But it really comes down to the independent voters. And when you look at registrations here, we've got the biggest party is the independents. And my question to you is, what do you think that you bring to this that would cause the independent voters to really consider you, given the fact that, you know, it's been a fairly Democratic Party run state for so long? I mean, what is it that you're bringing differently that causes people to say, wait a minute, this is really what I want to do?
And, you know, it's not just independents or unenrolleds, it's Democrats as well. You know, I'm the Republican candidate in this race, but we're going to get a lot of Democratic votes, and we're already getting a lot of support from Democrats. And the reason is people want a government that works for them, that serves their community. I've talked about, I'm never going to be a lobbyist, ever. I already have the best job I've ever had. I can't go down there and serve your interests and the interests of the community that you love if I'm trying to do a book deal or get a reality TV show, and I'm not going to accept the pension. That's how folks can trust that I'm going to be serving their interests. And ultimately, that's what all voters want. The party label really doesn't matter. They want someone who's down there to serve their interests, to look out for them and their community.
Okay. Now, I understand the Democratic candidate was the victor of a runoff and so forth. Are there any debates or anything planned that are coming up that we should know about?
Well, I thought, didn't you invite her here today?
She's waiting in the hallway.
We'll debate anytime, anywhere, any day.
I didn't know if any had been planned by the...
There's been 3 already. Mm-hmm. The first 2 actually my opponent had agreed to and committed to and then pulled out of. And you know, reasons known only to her. And then we had one a few nights ago on Dan Ray's radio show.
Okay.
And there's several more. There's I think 2 coming up next week, and there's I want to say at least 2 more after that.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask you about pledges and so forth like that. Have you, beside the pledge that you talked about, have there been other pledges that you've made, like term limits or anything else that the viewer might want to know about?
You know, not specifically, other than I'm going to fix the Rourke Bridge. I'm going to fix Route 2 in the Concord Road. I've made a lot of, you know, pledges on things I'm going to fix and things I'm going to do. Okay,
great. Well, Rick, we're kind of coming to the end of our time here, and this is usually when I give you a chance to, you know, make your final pitch to the viewers. So if you want to tell them the top 3 things about you that you think you're going to do that they should vote for you, feel free.
Absolutely. My name is Rick Green. I'm running for Congress. First, please go to my website, Rick Green for MA, rickgreenforma.com, or look for us on Facebook, Rick Green for Congress. I'm a businessman, and I bring a can-do, problem-solving attitude to the table. I've done the impossible my whole life, from building a tiny company out of a garage to employing over 500 people, and I want to put those problem-solving skills to you. I hope you'll vote for me to be your next congressman. Thank you. Well, thank you, Rick. It's been fun having you here. I'd also like to mention that this is my last second opinion. I'm glad to have Rick here. I've known him for years, watching him basically build his business more so than anything else. But I have wanted to just let you know I've enjoyed this program a great deal. And as I always said, you know, if you're ever confused, get a second opinion. I hope that meant that you would listen to somebody else beside me sometimes. But I've enjoyed it. I've looking forward to my next challenge, which is actually in another state. But until that, always get a second opinion.